Okay, the board will reconvene, and we're going to go to item 4.1, the state and federal update. Vice Chancellor Laura Mattoon.
Good morning. I don't usually get to say that when I present, so
Yeah.
I'm really excited to not be the dead last item.
Don't get too comfortable.
Okay. I'll be on point so I can maybe retain this prime spot. So we're starting on page 84. I'm going to provide a state update, and then I'm going to pause and take any questions, and then I'll provide the federal update and pause and take questions. I just want to start by saying we are closing out the 2019 year of policy and advocacy. This year, we held 2 board advocacy days in the Capitol. We held 3 legislative briefings that we sponsored in the Capitol. We participated in 4 informational hearings, and we conducted 9 site visits at colleges across the state with 38 individual representatives from the governor's office, legislative staff, Department of Finance, and LAO. So I just wanted to thank my staff for all the work that led to those advocacy efforts that took place in 2019. On page 84 begins our final 2019 legislative update. What you see here is that of the 232 bills that were introduced in 2019 that had a direct or indirect effect on community colleges and students, the governor signed 85 into law. 3 of the 4 bills that were sponsored by the Board of Governors were signed into law. 19 of 24 bills that we supported were signed into law, and we opposed 2 bills this year. Neither one of those were enacted. We move into 2020 with 147 higher education bills still pending, including the board-sponsored bill, Senate Bill 291, to create new financial aid opportunities for community college students. The next several pages in the agenda are the text of a memo that was sent to the field on November 4th that informs the field of all new bills signed into law in California. Some bills will require additional guidance from my colleagues in various divisions, and that additional guidance will be provided to the field by December 1st. I'm not going to go through the bills, but I do want to pause and allow questions to be asked regarding any of these bills or other matters.
Member Aguinaldo.
Good morning. My nephew is a sophomore at Saugus High School, and I am an alumna of the school. Our school suffered an unspeakable tragedy last week, and I'm not going to pretend that this is not a multidimensional issue, but I'm very interested in knowing how all the bills under the law enforcement section helps us with this issue and generally where our system stands.
Are you speaking to issues around gun control?
Gun violence protection and specifically mental health.
This year in the Budget Act, we received one-time dollars out of Proposition 63 to support mental health services on community college campuses. Those were distributed to the field on a competitive grant basis. We had many more applicants for those resources than there were resources available to distribute. We have requested $10 million in the upcoming budget specific to Prop 63 resources on an ongoing basis, so we could provide stable, ongoing funding to community colleges to provide mental health services on the college campuses. In terms of legislation related to gun control, we have not traditionally as a board taken positions on those matters. What we included in here around law enforcement was focused on bills affecting law enforcement that it had an effect on community colleges because of the role they play in having campus-based police. But if the board was interested in taking positions on those matters, we'll be bringing back in January a summary of legislative principles that will guide us in 2020, where you can review the principles and provide feedback to me and my team in terms of how the board would like us to take action on those related matters.
Any other board comments? Yes.
I just have a quick comment. as a student athlete myself, it's really amazing to see the governor signing AB 1573, the Student Athlete Bill of Rights, and SB 206, Collegiate Athletic Student Athlete Compensation and Representation. It's about time. Many of us student athletes really, specifically in these rough sports, risk everything. We put everything on the line for the institution. And so it's really great that the governor has finally given us the kind of support that we deserve and the recognition and control over our own likeness that every student athlete deserves. So really happy about that. Just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you. I would just note that one of the requirements different for community colleges than CSU and UC in the legislation is that we will be formalizing a task force and conducting a review of the rules as they should relate to community colleges. We're working directly with Student Services and with the General Counsel's Office to put together that task force, and I look forward to your participation.
Thank you.
Member Escobar-Carrillo.
Hi, how are you? So there are a couple of things I wanted to just point out. So I was pleased to see some of the legislation related to encouraging civic participation. Obviously, we want young people to be able to, and all of the students who come to the system to be able to exercise their right to vote, whoever they want to vote for, and giving them the option and encouragement of polling places on campus and helping people understand their civic role, I think, is really great. And one thing that I have been kind of thinking about as well before the board meeting was the role of community college system in terms of the census and census 2020. Obviously, young people, many people who attend, the system are underrepresented folks who are undercounted folks historically. And so I'm just wondering if made me think about whether you all are also thinking about things that we can do to encourage people to understand that the census matters, why it matters, including to help with funding for the system and various education and healthcare systems. So that was one question I had. And then I also had a question related just to the legislation for the Dream Resource Liaisons. So it was also good to see this legislation. Obviously, there's a lot going on related to undocumented students, and I'm wondering, as we get ready for whatever the Supreme Court's going to decide related to DACA, if you all are thinking about how these liaisons what role they can play in actually helping people understand whatever the Supreme Court decides on DACA.
On the census, my colleague, Vice Chancellor Feist, has been really leading the efforts around participating in Census 2020. We've provided information to the appointed commission that's working on this about how the community college system can help with marketing and outreach to ensure that our students in our communities are fully counted. I can ask him if he has additional details to share at this time.
As Vice Chancellor Feist comes up, I can tell you that we are also participating with the Complete Count Census Committee to ensure that that there's outreach to our colleges for the purpose of employing students as for the various jobs that exist, whether on the federal side or on the state side, to improve the count. Go ahead, Paul.
Thank you. So yes, we do have a program in place. We're finalizing a contract right now with Complete Count 2020 to sort of mobilize and leverage the communications and marketing infrastructure that we have through I Can Afford College and the other campaigns to get the message out to students. We're working with the foundation very closely in terms of getting student ambassadors to also spread the word. So we're going to enter into that contract. It's going to run through May.
And then in terms of the Dreamer Resource Liaison legislation, I would just note that we had applied for and received through our foundation a grant from the James Irvine Foundation that allowed us to do a landscape survey of resources currently offered at our community colleges in support of our Dreamers. Once that was completed, we used our Undocumented Student Week of Action, which occurred last month, to market these best practices, including the use of liaisons. We are hopeful that we will be able to secure additional resources to help the Chancellor's Office and the Foundation show colleges how within existing resources locally, they can fund liaisons and ensure that those folks have the right information to provide their students with accurate resources and information around their educational opportunities and other needs. And on top of that, I would just note that we received $10 million in legal services resources in last year's budget. The money flows through our office to the Department of Social Services to contract with nonprofit legal service providers. We've just finalized the host campuses for those resources. And so in all of the regions of the state, we will have free legal resources available to our undocumented students.
Thanks. I have a question under the basic needs section on page 90, AB 1278. You say that the Chancellor's Office Student Services Programs is going to provide additional guidance to colleges. This is on the bill that requires colleges to notify students about available social services. And while a couple of items I think that ought to be included that maybe were not specified in the bill include access to Medi-Cal or subsidized coverage under the Affordable Care Act, and also the availability of the Earned Income Tax Credit, particularly the California Earned Income Tax Credit, which was lowered to people as young as 18. And also when doing the Medi-Cal notice, it permitted, up to the bill that passed, permits undocumented students undocumented people under age 25 to qualify for Medi-Cal for the first time. So there's some opportunities under new legislation that can provide some financial assistance to people in need.
I will take that note back and would also note that we are working collaboratively with IEPI and Student Services on providing training to our colleges about how to maximize access to other public benefit programs. We will definitely include this full scope in that work.
Thank you. Any other, oh no, you're going to federal, right? Okay. Do we really have to listen to federal?
I'm going to be really quick.
See, can I? On page 92, AB 1051, that authorizes a community college district to employ part-time clinical nursing faculty to exceed the 67% load cap. Is that in conflict with what we were talking about earlier today about full-time faculty members?
This bill reinstates law that existed until 2015 when it was allowed to sunset. This is an exception to that rule based on a generally common understanding that it can become difficult to recruit full-time clinical nursing faculty under our existing structures. The bill was brought to the Chancellor's Office by the independent union, and there was no opposition moving forward in the process. I think certainly there is an argument about when it's appropriate to utilize full-time faculty. I think this bill is trying to respond to difficulty in maintaining full-time faculty because of the unique circumstances around nurses who are employed as nurses and who need to be used in clinical sites, where accreditors require a certain percentage of full-time clinical nursing faculty, but colleges may have difficulty in recruiting.
All right.
Okay.
Moving on to Washington, D.C.
On the federal side, I was just going to note that we are primarily focusing on Higher Education Act reauthorization. The Senate leader, Senator Alexander, has focused on trying to create a small package of issues that could be dealt with in Higher Education Act reauthorization. The House is really focused on more of a comprehensive review and reform. Legislation was released last month. We are still in the process of reviewing that legislation and what it would mean for California. In both pieces, there's some common areas where we have supported increasing access to need-based financial aid for students, ensuring appropriate oversight of institutions, and streamlining federal-state partnerships in support of students. We'll continue to monitor those issues and provide support for legislation that meets with our general federal principles. I would also just quickly note that we are beginning to prepare for our annual delegation to Washington, D.C., which will occur in February as a part of the National Legislative Summit, which is hosted by the American Association of Community Colleges. The only other thing I would lift up is I outlined on page 117 concerns around ongoing funding for HBCUs and minority-serving institutions. What we understand the status of that funding to be right now is that the department will continue to fund existing grantees through fiscal year 2020. There is pending legislation, the Future Act, that would expand funding for those programs beyond that time period. We will continue to monitor that, and we hope to see movement in the next couple of weeks around those items. I'll stop there and happy to take questions.
Member Perigo.
This isn't really a question about federal legislation, but just a comment in general. I was at ASCCC plenary, and a number of people that I chatted with there said that they really find that your legislative tracker a helpful tool. And so I quickly shot off a text to Chancellor Oakley and said if there's any chance that that could be updated and made available to the field, they would really appreciate that, because they find it to be a helpful tool. So just wanted to pass that along.
Thank you, absolutely.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you, Vice Chancellor. You may make it back in the morning someday. Okay, next is item 4.2, Vision for Success Spotlight, AB 705.
You may need to go to 4.4.
Oh, they're not here? Okay. We'll skip over that and 4.3 because I understand the people aren't here yet. So item 4.4, California Workforce Pathways Joint Advisory Committee update. It's 4.3, I mean 4.4, I'm sorry.
147.
Good morning. I'm Shani Weber, Vice Chancellor for Workforce and Economic Development. Good morning, President Epstein, Vice President Hayes, members of the board, and Chancellor Oakley. This information item is to provide an update on the work of the California Workforce Pathways Joint Advisory Committee. In May, we came before you with the Perkins 4 transition plan that was approved and submitted to the U.S. Department of Education. Since that time, CDE and the Chancellor's Office staff have been collaborating on the Perkins 5 federal application, which is due to the U.S. Department of Education on April 15th of next year. This current draft has been informed by a stakeholders group of 60. Originally, 80 individuals were invited. 60 attended the stakeholder meetings have been held that you will hear more about this in the presentation. The makeup of which were according to the Perkins 5 requirement. At the post-secondary level, it requires representatives of career and technical education programs at post-secondary educational institutions, including faculty and administrators. 13 of the stakeholder representatives were post-secondary community college individuals, and 6 had a faculty role. Right now, I will turn it over to Board Member Grande, who chairs the Joint Advisory Committee.
Good morning, President Epstein, Vice President Haynes, and Chancellor Oakley. I bring greetings on behalf of the California Workforce Pathways Joint Advisory Committee. There are 3 Board of Governors appointed to serve on the Joint Advisory Committee, and joining me here today is Bill Rawlings. Our other member, Alma Salazar, is absent today. The purpose of the Joint Advisory Committee is to provide advice and some deliberation on the work of vocational education plans in California. We regularly receive updates from the Chancellor's office regarding our strong workforce program, as well as from the California Department of Ed and State Board of Education on the CTE incentive grant, as well as the K-12 portion of strong workforce. Today, we are here to provide an update on the timeline for our Perkins 5 federal application and the California State Plan for Career Technical Education. As I mentioned, there are 3 representatives from the Board of Governors on the advisory committee, along with 3 representatives of our State Board of Education. The 6 of us, along with 2, along with 2 ex officio members, Christian McGuire from Young Invincibles and David Rattray from the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce, meet monthly to discuss the items that I already mentioned, the CTIG, the Strong Workforce Program, and the Perkins 5 application. Go to the next one. I think we skipped one. Back one. There you go. During this last year, we have worked extensively on the transition grant from Perkins 4 to Perkins 5, and we are now to the point of solidifying our Perkins 5 federal application. As Shenny previously mentioned, we have had a number of stakeholder input sessions that have been convened in the months of August, September, October, and November. And we have our public comment period that will open up after our draft plan is seen one more time by the Workforce Advisory Committee next Monday, November 25th. It will be open for public commentary from December 2nd to January 3rd. During that period of time, we will continue to work on the Perkins 5 plan along with the California State Plan for Career Technical Education. By March 13th, we will submit the plan to the Governor's Office for approval, as well as present the final plan to the Board of Governors in March. We are required to submit our federal Perkins 5 application to the United States Department of Education no later than April 15th. The stakeholder groups that have been assembled to date that took place in the meetings August through November included a virtual stakeholder meeting at the beginning of August, followed by an in-person stakeholder meeting, a second in-person stakeholder meeting, and then the feedback session that we had in collaboration with the California Community Colleges Association for Occupational Education Conference that was in October.
Additionally, I also met with the Academic Senate Executive Committee on September 22nd, and also an item was presented to the Consultation Council on October 17th to outline what is in the federal application, what's being addressed, and then also the timeline for the entire federal application development process and the CTE state plan process and timeline.
The point that we're at right now is developing our California State Plan for Career Technical Education in parallel with the Perkins 5 federal application. There have been multiple discussions between the CDE and the Chancellor's office regarding how we should approach our state plan for career technical education, as well as how we should proceed with the federal application, understanding the time constraints that limit the amount of work that can be done simultaneously on the state plan and the Perkins application. You'll notice that we continue after April 15th, once our Perkins 5 application has been submitted to the federal government, to work on our state plan. We anticipate by July 10th to present the final draft of our state plan to the Joint Advisory Committee, provide a public feedback period of time from August through September, and then by November of 2020, present the final California State Plan for Career Technical Education through the Joint Advisory Committee. For those of you that are interested in providing feedback to the Perkins 5 application, we will have our next meeting on Monday, November 25th at the Department of Ed. The draft document is already available on the California Workforce Pathways Joint Advisory Committee website, and it will again be open for public commentary beginning December 3rd. Are there any questions?
Well, first of all, thank you for your service, and Member Rawlings, this seems like a lot of work, and we look forward to seeing the result of it all, sometime next year. But are there any board comments? Vice President Haynes.
So I just have to say that we have three of the best members on the committee, and because I have sat in your seat, I know the amount of work that it actually takes to do a good job, and we couldn't have anybody better than the three of you. This is just an observation, and it's sort of a future recognition that the state plan and the Perkins guidelines are wonderful, and what I know of the work that you've all done, you're right on target in terms of what those plans should include. My comment is really about California is a huge state. And so the alignment of what community colleges do relative to what K-12 or high school or those programs that are embedded within K-12 is just really critical. And for me, that's the hard work of making certain that the guidelines and the principles and the core values are pushed down and they're reflected in the programming and that alignment. And so I would hope that you take, and I don't know how long this group will be in existence, because it took 10 years for it to come back. It was in law, it was in regulations. It took 10 years. And I think there needs to be some oversight either by the chancellor's office, just to make certain that our school districts as well as our community college districts are doing this work of dual enrollment and alignment in a way that it really makes certain that the students are making that pathway an important one, because it is indeed, because we're talking about career education. So that requires an oversight that's very different than what we've asked you to do, which is to make certain that the values are there. I think there's this other step that needs to happen as well.
Vice President Haynes, we intend to continue that work and the work that you mentioned, which is actually very, very important indeed, through our K-12 Strong Workforce programs. And as we roll that out, it's currently in its second year, and we hope to achieve those systems alignment, at least improve them over time.
Thank you.
And I'd like to express our appreciation for the groundwork that you helped facilitate before Bill and I both got on to the Joint Advisory Committee, because those guiding principles have been at the foundation of all of our conversations in our transition plan, in our Perkins 5 application, as well as in our state plan. And I will say we are so fortunate to have Sheni Weber and Jeff Mazur. I have such a hard time with this. Marizik, helping us shepherd the community colleges and the K-12s into that partnership that does provide for that streamlined pathway from the K-12 into the community colleges and then into the workforce.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So, do we have the people that are wanting to present 4.2, or should we go on to 4.5? 4.5 or 4.3? They're not here either. Okay, 4.5. This will be our last item before the break. General Counsel LaForestier.
Hello again. We're joined by Vice Chancellor Marty Alvarado for this item. So the board agenda has, I think, a pretty comprehensive overview of the regulatory or oversight functions of the Board of Governors as we see them. As you know, the Online Community College Act placed the Board of Governors in an unusual position of essentially giving oversight to itself as it manages the online community college. There were a couple of letters that were issued that prompted Chancellor Oakley to ask staff to look at our regulatory role, one from FAC and one from the Academic Senate. I think we've pretty comprehensively reviewed what those letters said and what our views of those concerns are. There are two items in particular that I think it's worthwhile taking a moment to focus on. One is the question of whether Calbright's programs are duplicative of other community college programs. And then the second issue deals with accreditation, and I'll mention that one because that seems like something that is likely to come before the board in the not too distant future. So with respect to non-duplication, one, I think, overarching concept that informs how we're looking at Calbright is the principle that the education code is a permissive one, and that means that a community college district may do what the law does not prohibit it from doing. So I think is that when we look at what the Online Community College Act requires of the community college, it shouldn't be construed as necessarily a limitation. The community college district can be required to do something, but that doesn't preclude it from doing other things. When we looked at the non-duplication issue in particular, there are two concepts that seem to be related. One is the obligation that Calbright offer unique content, but the Act does not require all Calbright content to be unique. So there would be an expectation, certainly, that Calbright will offer unique content, but it's not an all-encompassing requirement. And the other question concerns the delivery of content and whether that is not duplicative of content offered by other community college districts. And we considered what the legislation might mean by not duplicative. The term is not defined, but it doesn't seem to require there to be no overlap between courses. It doesn't mean that there has to be that there must be a complete unity of content between the two programs for the statute to be violated or the principle to be violated. But I think inevitably there will be some overlap between courses. And the question as to whether this not duplicative requirement is met is something that understanding of that term will probably evolve over time as we assess the programs that Calbright issues to us. And then on September 30th, we issued our first notice, as the legislation requires, to the Department of Finance and the legislature, where we assessed and gave notice to the legislature as to whether we believe the first program offerings from Calbright are not duplicative. We determined that they are not. The significance of that notice is essentially that. It is a notice to the legislature. It is not a certification. There don't seem to be any rights that attend to our issuance of that notice. And so there could potentially be a time in the future where the chancellor indicates that Calbright's program is duplicative, but it's not certain what the consequence of that would be. There wouldn't be any prohibition on that course being offered, but it would be noticed to the legislature of duplication, and the legislature has decided that it wants to know if duplication happens and when. So we issued the notice on September 30th. And we reached the determination that because the 3 course offerings were competency-based, asynchronous, self-paced courses requiring applied learning and were a fully online program, that they were not duplicative of existing course offerings. And Vice Chancellor Alvarado performed that analysis, and she is here to talk a little bit more about that.
Good morning. So we worked closely with Calbright to gather information on the scope of their programs as we went through the approval process. We asked them to specifically identify how their offerings were unique, non-duplicative, not unique, very important distinction, how they were non-duplicative. And then after a review of their program design and delivery, identified the 4 areas that were noted. In our analysis, it was the comprehensive package that constitutes the delivery of their program that really had no duplication across our system that we are aware of. So that was based on the information that we have, our current understanding of current programs across our 114 existing institutions. And it was the combined 4 elements as part of their program that really solidified for us that there wasn't a program that currently offered all 4 of those delivery elements within a single program. There are certainly elements, apprenticeship and applied learning, asynchronous programs that exist in isolation or with some combination, but not with all 4 of those components. And happy to take questions.
Member Hall.
So as I went through my confirmation process and when I visited a college, that was definitely a hot button topic about being duplicative. So I think as we strive to be transparent in everything we do, we need to let the legislature and perhaps college presidents know why it's not duplicative, because the college president I met with said her faculty asserted strong objections to the fact that they believed, at least, that our courses were duplicating what's already offered on campuses. And again, to reiterate that several of the legislative members that I met with wanted that explained a little bit better. So just keep that in mind that we need to let the legislature know and the colleges why our position is correct, or why your interpretation is correct, that it's not duplicative.
We will definitely do that. We've also taken a look at the programs that were identified in some of the communications we've had from various stakeholder groups to evaluate those programs to understand whether or not they aligned with all 4 of those components. So we are taking all of that feedback and really trying to evaluate whether or not there are programs out there that meet these standards or meet these design and delivery.
If I can just add to the answer to your question, Member Hall, there's a couple of components here, and some of which, because this is new, I think will, over time, we'll be able to provide more clear and consistent explanations. But I just want to unbundle a couple of things that have come up that are related to this issue of duplication. One is the legislature heard directly, and it's unfortunate that Member Costa's not here because she and I were the ones that testified on this issue before the legislature. Medical coding was a program of study that was specifically called out for in testimony and as the legislation progressed. And there was a conversation that occurred around what makes what would be the online college's view of medical coding different than medical coding programs that already existed within college campuses. And the main distinction at that time was that medical coding for the purposes of the online college would be specifically for job skill acquisition, not for the creation of a certificate degree or an associate's degree. Furthermore, it would be competency-based in nature. It would be specifically aligned with an employer demand. So there were several issues. That doesn't mean that community colleges don't also take a look at those issues when they deal with local employer demand. So I just want to at least be clear on one piece, that medical coding was and has always been part of the legislation that enabled the creation of the online college. The second issue is there is a lot of conflating between what we mean by duplication or what we mean by competition. Many districts, many colleges are concerned about possible competition, and that's not unreasonable because many colleges are declining in enrollment or plateauing in enrollment. And so, one thing we have to be clear is that colleges right now compete for enrollment. Whether you're at Santa Monica College and enrollment's coming from the LA Community College District, whether you're on one side of the Bay or the other at San Francisco or Peralta, their students vote with their feet and go where the programs exist. And we don't have specific boundaries, although we maintain that no one college should be in a position to undermine the enrollment of another college. So we will monitor that as Calbright reports its enrollments. We will take a look to see where those enrollments are coming from, what kinds of enrollments there are. And we certainly expect, as we do now, for district CEOs to work with each other whenever there's a concern that's presented. Typically, for example, when I was at Long Beach, if Cerritos would be stepping up the recruitment of students from Long Beach, I would pick up the phone and have a discussion with the local CEO, and we could resolve the need. But so I want to make sure that we don't continue to conflate competition with duplication. Duplication is a very specific issue that we're trying to focus in on, and I think that focus will evolve, as Executive Vice Chancellor Alvarado mentioned, over time. But that is it is a concern of this office that we uphold the spirit of the legislation that enabled Calbright to exist.
Member Baum?
I'm glad to see this raised. I just had a question. Does the original, and my question's about governance too, about us overseeing another institution over which we have legal authority. Does the original legislation stipulate that the members of the Board of Governors are the trustees of the online community college?
Yes. What it says is that the Board of Governors will act as the governing board of the online community college. And then this distinction between trustees and the members of the Board of Governors is sort of a terminology distinction that we created in our first meeting so that we wouldn't be confused about what role the board was performing as it performed the two functions.
Would the board ever have the ability to appoint a board of trustees for the online community college in the same way either we have appointed special trustees at other districts or have a smaller group of board members serve as the trustees to conduct business?
The legislation contemplates that the Board of Governors is the governing board of the college, so I think you are stuck with that for the foreseeable future. It also specifies that this arrangement is not a conflict of interest. There was early on an expectation that much of the governance of the online college would be performed by an executive committee of the Board of Trustees, and that seems to have fallen by the wayside. But there is an executive committee that was created, and it was endowed with a lot of authority to conduct the work of governing the online college, although not to the exclusion of the whole Board of Trustees if that's how the board wanted to conduct itself.
Yes, my hope would be that there could be some kind of legal separation because it is there seems to be an inherent conflict, obviously, and if we want to hold the online college accountable and the legal authority of the online college accountable, we're looking in the mirror.
Understood. And if the relationship eventually becomes unmanageable, then that's something that the legislature will have to grapple with in some way.
So that's the only vehicle for that.
I will add, Member Baum, that two things. One is that it is whatever governing body exists for a district, it is supposed to represent the needs of the district, and so in the other 72 districts, they are locally elected. So I think what the legislature and the governor contemplated in this case was at least the Board of Governors goes through an appointments process and a confirmation process. So therefore, you in your role of Board of Governors represent the interests of all the people of California. So I think that was the logic that was used. The other thing I would say is many community college districts form separate legal entities, separate boards to oversee whether a joint powers or whether a financing district. So it's not unprecedented for even a local board of trustees to create a separate board that also functions to oversee a part of the district's business, even though the members may be the same. So it is difficult, and I think people reasonably express concern that the board can be independent in its roles. I think the issue will be whether or not over time the board can demonstrate that it can be independent.
Vice President Hay?
Thank you. So you mentioned the formation of the body that oversees Calbright College, but the notation of being a board of trustees has with it a different set of legal requirements, i.e. The Brown Act that governs it, but you didn't quite mention that piece. And I want to make certain that that's sort of a requirement, or is it more that we could have made a determination of being governed under Taft-Hartley? I just want to make certain.
Bagley-Keene?
Bagley-Keene.
Yeah, I think the idea was that the Calbright Board of Trustees would function as local districts do, and there were certainly some advantages to functioning under the Brown Act, for example, because the notice period is shorter and it's just a little more flexible than Bagley-Keene is. So I think the idea at the beginning was to take advantage of that, but also to have the Board of Trustees function in parallel to other boards of trustees.
Oh, thank you.
Member Aguinaldo?
Thank you. I just have a question asking for some clarity on your interpretation of statute. In F1 of Ed Code, I think it's 75,001, it's talking about that the content must be unique, but the delivery must be non-duplicative. The following section says that the program is not duplicative. So I'm a little bit confused as to the difference between unique and non-duplicative. And I appreciate your memo on this. It was very helpful, but I just need some clarity on how to reconcile those two.
That's a good question. So the question concerns the first provision is focused on delivery being non-duplicative, and then the notice provision on the next line is a request that the Chancellor's office provide notice to the legislature about whether the programs are non-duplicative. I think that there may be arguments on both sides of this. I think the better interpretation is to read the two in context in order to harmonize the two provisions and assume that what the legislature is asking for is notice about whether delivery is non-duplicative. And I think in construing the meaning of delivery, Vice Chancellor Alvarado has construed that rather broadly. So we're not talking about whether the course content is delivered electronically or in person, but the whole panoply of issues that surround how content is delivered to students.
And if I can, I would just add, we definitely evaluated each program and the comprehensive design of the delivery as we tried to harmonize these two components. And then I also want to build on Chancellor Oakley's comments where we are going to learn as we go through this iteration with the online college. And there are elements of the delivery, the flexible schedule, and the competency-based education that don't currently exist in the ways that they are currently being implemented, given the latitudes that the online college currently has, in particular around financial aid requirements, as an example. And so they are able to construct ways of delivering the content and coursework in ways that our existing system is not able to. So we are also looking at those regulations along with our 5C Academic Senate counterparts and really trying to understand what this looks like as we move forward. So we will continue to learn, and at the moment, this was also what informed much of our analysis, is that at the moment, our system is not currently structured to be able to accommodate some of the designs that are currently being delivered by the online college.
Okay, I think we have some public comment.
Before we get on to public comment, I think there was, I did want to take a couple of seconds to talk about accreditation, which is another significant issue. The online college has indicated a plan to seek DIAC accreditation. There is a requirement that any accrediting body that a district uses would be approved by the board. And so we have not received a request yet from the online college seeking the chancellor's recommendation that DIAC be approved as an accreditor of the online college. If that happens, presumably that would be an authorization that would open the door to DIAC accreditation by all colleges. So there will be some policy issues for the board to consider, but that's tabled for the moment until we receive a request for that process to happen.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can you clarify what DIAC is?
Distance Education Accrediting Commission? Yeah, okay.
So we have two public comments, one from Debbie Klein and the other from John Stanskis.
Waiting for tomorrow.
Good afternoon, President Epstein, Vice President Haynes, Chancellor Oakley, and members of the Board of Governors. I am John Stanskis, the President of the Academic Senate for California Community Colleges. I appreciate that our letters have been included also in the board documents so that you can see the position of the Academic Senate. It is incumbent upon me to report to you that the delegates by acclamation expressed their deep concern about duplication of programs, and that is the message from the faculty to you regarding duplication. We do not dispute that the Chancellor's Office has a role in evaluating the efficacy of districts, all districts, including this one, and a role to exercise their judgment about how districts comply with the law. We do feel incumbent upon us to tell you the Academic Senate does not follow the logic that's been presented in the judgment and disagrees with the conclusion of that judgment. The idea that a section of law says not duplicate programs, and another section says not duplicate program delivery, it appears that the logic that's been applied has selected one of those to follow and not the other. Because a program is defined in Title V very broadly, not based on delivery. And so that is a concern of the faculty who are currently working to serve students in these programs, sometimes in non-credit fields which are competency-based, sometimes in online programs, sometimes with open entry, open exit for flexible scheduling. And I think that you understand our concern. We've expressed that concern publicly to the legislature and asked for clarity. And we will abide with whatever happens, right? The legislature might say, this isn't what we meant, or they might say nothing, in which case they're relying on you to make that judgment as the Board of Governors. So I appreciate we have a good working relationship, I think, with the Chancellor's Office. We aren't always going to agree on everything. And this is an area where we disagree, and we will continue to work together to figure that out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, President Epstein, Vice President Haynes, Chancellor Oakley, Board of Governors. I'm Debbie Klein with the Faculty Association of California Community Colleges. I'm just here, in support, the FAC is in support of the Senate's position, which John just articulated so clearly. The FAC membership is also very deeply concerned that Calbright is competing with established programs, which is in violation of California Education Code. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have more board comment. Member Baum.
I just want to, in conclusion to this conversation, which has been very helpful, think as we've indicated, there's probably some legislative clarification that's going to need to come eventually. I would encourage us at some point, to consider legislative clarification that might allow us to appoint a relatively independent or associated board of trustees. If we're supposed to fulfill the mission of standing up a new district, that district needs to have a board of trustees that is that we can then provide adequate and substantial oversight over, as we do all the districts across the state. So I'd add that to a list of further clarification as we look at the legislation.
Member Perigo.
I concur completely with that assessment. I really, honestly, not only do I think that I really do believe that there's a potential conflict of interest, but moreover, there's no district CEO that I know of that has to convince 17 people of something, right? Like, it puts Calbright also at a huge disadvantage to get their work done with a board this large. So I just think for lots of reasons we should seek clarification and allow them to have a board that can serve their interests regularly. But what I wanted to ask was, you said you did an analysis of the programs that exist and how these are Calbright, how you're assessing their uniqueness or their non-duplicativeness, if that's a word. And I'm wondering if I see that you have provided some of your analysis here, but do you have just a kind of down and dirty, clean chart that we could look at? These are the programs that exist and why they don't. As you went through that process, is there anything that was kind of created that could help us see that there's how your conclusions were drawn?
Apologies. We don't have anything formal that evaluates all of our existing programs in the manner that you're describing. The magnitude of the numbers of programs across all of our institutions really precluded that level of depth. However, what I would say is that given the information that we currently have, the program approval process, and what we currently understand across our programs, and again, as I mentioned earlier, given some of the constraints that our colleges currently operate under, specific to competency-based education and flexible calendaring, really suggested that it wasn't possible for our institutions to be operating in the same ways as the online college. What we have done, as mentioned, is that as programs were identified, either via communications with stakeholders or informal letters, we have gone through those programs and reviewed those programs to really understand whether or not there is duplication, and so we could provide that analysis.
I would appreciate that, and also if you could help us or provide us with information that you just described of what the limitations are in current operations that show this uniqueness with the online college, because I'm just still having a hard time understanding uniqueness in what they're doing, knowing some of the other programs around the state. So that would help me understand it better. Thank you.
Okay, Member Hall.
Did I understand the public comment from the other two witnesses that the legislature has been asked or will be asked to clarify this duplication issue, and if so, do we know when that clarification will happen?
The letter that the Academic Senate, or the letters that the Academic Senate sent to legislative leadership, asked for clarification on both the duplication question and the accreditation issue. I think those were the two issues that were the focus. But the legislature is not in session, and maybe Laura could. Come on up, Laura.
Good afternoon.
I would just note that both Assembly and Senate staff have reached out to our office to provide additional information regarding this question. We've provided information similar to what you have received in terms of the interpretation around these directives. If the legislature were to intend to introduce clarifying language, the soonest they could do so would be January.
Okay, I think with that we will break for lunch. Let's say 1:15. Give everybody an hour, and we'll see you then.
Is it closed session?
We are going
closed
to
session.
close session as indicated in the agenda.